Afternoon all, let's continue our look at the evolution of chess style and find some very interesting games of Mikhail Botvinnik, who represented really the next generation of players after the greats of Lasker, Capablanca and Alekhine. Now in Nottingham 1936 we had covered quite a few of the early rounds in great detail, but let's examine particular games now from the key interest points of style. And here a stylistic question is raised really about the isolated queen's pawn. This is a very instructive game showing how the blockade of an isolated queen's pawn can actually sometimes backfire on the blockader for dynamic reasons. And I think the notion of concepts backfiring and revisiting established rules in inverted commas, how really chess is becoming more and more malleable, not valuable, malleable, that these rules are meant to be broken if they're not hard and fast, that you can allow blockades if you get strong dynamic compensation. So let's see what happens here. Mikhail Botvinnik playing against Vidmar kicks off with c4. Vidmar, by the way, he was awarded the GM title in 1950. That's 14 years after this game. He was actually Yugoslavia's first grandmaster. He devoted himself to his academic and electrical engineering career, so a bit like Botvinnik, who really had his main career in engineering. So his chess achievements are all the more remarkable. In period 1911 to 1930, pardon me, Vidmar belonged to the world's top 6 players. He was the Nordic champion in 1909 and Yugoslav champion in 1939. So that's 3 years after this game. So a very, very strong player indeed. He replied e6 to Botvinnik's English opening, knight f3, d5, and we have a transposition now into a queen's gambit decline position. It seems fairly typical. We also have some notes by Alexander Alekhine available for this game, which I think are in the public domain. And Alekhine commented actually on this move, bishop d3, indicating that actually the variations with rook c1 instead have been more analysed at that point in time. So let's see, c5, creating a lot of tension in the centre. After castling, now we see c takes d4. So classically, black is trying to saddle white with the IQP, the isolated queen's pawn here. And actually in Alekhine's notes, you see a dynamic perspective in the notes here, indicating as the black pieces are not so developed so as to attack the isolated d pawn, the better policy here in fact is the usual taking and then a6, to play b5 and bishop b7. And you notice that white's allowed this structure here, so it's just about sorting out the bishop really. So this is what Alexander Alekhine gives. So it's interesting that black is attracted with isolating the queen's pawn. So how can this possibly backfire? Is it based on a lack of development here or something else? Let's find out. E takes d4 and now d takes c4. So we have a classic game example now coming up. This is a very interesting illustration that black is really centering around the d5 square blockade. So knight b6, bishop just drops back to b3. We still have an issue though with this bishop. Note in the other plan the bishop will try and come alive on the diagonal, but here we've got a problem, bishop on c8 still. Bishop d7, the bishop's going to come like this. Does this sort out the problem? Well, the notes by Alekhine indicate that this is the beginning of a risky plan in view of white's prospects of a kingside attack. The half pinning of the king's knight, so this knight is a kind of treated by Alexander Alekhine as a half pin, and he indicates this could be potentially dangerous. Although it seems harmless at the moment, within a few moves it could become extremely disagreeable to black. So that's interesting that Alexander Alekhine indicated actually instead of this 11th move to try and break the half pin with knight fd5, which of course is using the d5 blockade square. So that's kind of prophylaxis type thinking as well, and not minding in fact if we look at this, well definitely the bishop exchange, the knight could come back I guess. Let's put on a Kibitzer here in this variation. I think this is okay for black to take with the knight actually here. Queen is possible as well, but that would be okay. So instead we see this bishop d7. Now queen d3. This is actually quite a strong move now, because there's a simple battery effect just on h7. That's a real problem. This diagonal is potentially quite dangerous. So now already that freeing move knight fd5 could be met potentially with bishop c2. But is this that harmful? Objectively, g6, it might not be that harmful, as maybe Alekhine had indicated in his notes for this game. But so we see knight bd5, and this leaves this kind of half pin construction, which can be quite dangerous. So maybe this is a slight issue to play it like this. We see knight e5, and now bishop c6. So not minding getting a potentially backward pawn on the semi-open c file here. Black is encouraging knight takes c6. That was a problem piece. So this maneuver, I mean, it all looks fairly logical to blockade the isolated queen's pawn. So what happens here? Rook ad1. This now potentially frees the queen, makes the d pawn a bit stronger, so the queen can move away, perhaps without worrying so much about d4. But now black, I think, does go quite badly wrong with this next move, knight b4. Okay, so what is black trying to do here? The thing is, white potentially in this position has got ideas like queen h3 and bishop c2. So it would have been nice potentially to try and organise defence of h7. And what was actually recommended by Alekhine was rook c8 to be able to answer queen h3 by potentially just taking here and then bishop e4, and this safeguards this diagonal. So here, of course, the isolated queen's pawn's gone, but there's another potentially exploitable weakness, this backward pawn on the same c file for black. So that kind of possibility is also interesting. But white might have a little bit of pressure here nonetheless. You know, if he can start to get his pawns going, this could be quite dangerous for black. These pawns are not so bad with d5 on the cards. So that's not entirely ideal. But let's see what happened then. After knight b4 though, queen h3, and the knight, okay, at the moment stopping the use of c2. Black now plays bishop d5, but it leaves white with a trump card really, this light square bishop versus black's seemingly nice looking blockade of the d5 pawn. So let's see, knight takes d5, knight b takes d5. How would we evaluate this position today? Is black simply, in Nimzovician terms, just keeping a nice blockade on d5? Is that enough? He's also practically got rid of his problem piece as well. So you would think that most of the issues for black are not there. But with the absence of this c8 bishop, black is a little bit weaker on the light squares. Although it's a bad bishop, it's helping the security of the light squares. And white has this light square bishop he really wants to liberate as well across this diagonal. And this next move is very instructive, f4. So there's a battering ram effect to try and blast open this diagonal and try and exploit black's sensitivity, extra sensitivity on the light squares. How can black actually react to this? If he played g6 here, this could be a problem. Bishop h6, and if rook e8, in Alexander Alekhine's notes, he actually gives g4 as being quite a good move, but from an engine point of view, there's something even stronger than g4, which seems to be f5. If we look at this position, is black in real trouble? If e takes f5, then rook takes f5, and we see here some big problems for black's king safety. There's actually a forced mate in 6 here after queen takes f5. Very dangerous threats of queen g5 and knights on f7, and black actually can't defend this. Just to give an example, if, well, king h8, then knight takes f7 check. If bishop f8, then check, and then knight takes f7. It's actually a forced mate here. So this looks like a very, very strong position. If g takes, then here again rook takes f5 is very strong. This position here, threatening Queen G5, is just incredibly strong. So this is even stronger than Alexander Alekhine's notes, just to play F5 in this position. So it seems that this is very difficult to parry this move. Black tries Rook C8, and now we see this dangerous F5. So with the trump card of the bishop, which Black hasn't got a counter bishop on the light squares, this is getting quite menacing, this light square pressure. Black now plays E takes F5, and we see Rook takes F5, and this has become a bit more sensitive. This pin is a little bit more dangerous, especially if the bishop moves, then we have a real pin on the queen. Also, look at this diagonal. This is quite a dangerous diagonal. Black now played a move which basically loses quite quickly, Queen D6, but it's actually quite a difficult position. If we just go back here for a moment and look at Rook C7, in this position, it's very, very dangerous for Black in any case, because Rook DF1, and White is now threatening all sorts of things. There's a lot of pressure here still with this knight being exerted on Black's position. Just to give an example, if Knight B6, Queen G3, not minding even the D pawn here, if Queen takes D4, now White has very serious threats on F6. So for example, if King H8, Knight takes F7, what is Black actually doing here? If Knight D5, again Knight takes F7, it's just too much pressure on the king side here is being exerted. There's too many threats to deal with. If King H8 here, instead of taking D pawn, then all sorts of things are quite dangerous. Bishop takes F7, for example, and again we have a very, very difficult position for Black. This is just intense pressure on the king side, and very, very serious threats like Knight G6 mating. So White has adequate compensation here. Even on Rook C7, it seems potentially quite a crushing position. But Queen D6 lost quickly. I wonder if you can spot the move that Mikhail Botvinnik played in this position if I give you 10 seconds starting from now, or you might want to pause the video. Okay, he played Knight takes F7, and this creates potentially an unprotected piece on C8. This is why it's partly so dangerous. So let's rule out King takes F7. If King takes F7, then Bishop takes F6, and with that Knight pinned, this is just all over really. After Rook takes D5, there's going to be a nasty, discovered check, or there's a forced mate with Rook H5 check. It's all over there. So that's unpalatable. So what can Black do? Well, he tried Rook takes F7, and now here White can win in at least two ways. White played actually Bishop takes F6, but also he can just simply exploit this unprotected piece immediately. If he just plays a Rook takes D5 here, then the C8 Rook is loose in this position. So this is a very strong move here as well. Let's actually put on Kibitzer again, and let's see. So if Knight takes, well, we just take on C8, and then there's two horrendous pins here which actually give White a decisive advantage. What can actually Black do in this position after Rook F1? So that creates a real pin on the Knight if this Rook takes on F1. For example, Rook takes F1, King takes F1. Now White will be threatening Queen F5, to which Black doesn't have, it seems, an adequate defense. If, for example, H6, this only delays things. The bishop can drop back either to D2 or E3, with still that huge threat of Queen F5. And if the king steps away here, then just Bishop takes D5. So Black's actually had it in this position. There's a spike check. You could try it after King E2. There's a horrible pin again on the knight, queen d8 there, and that pin is really exploited. So these variations show rook takes d5 is also quite devastating here. But in the game we see bishop takes f6, and black played now bishop takes f6. If knight takes f6, well, minimum he's like losing exchange, but immediately like rook takes f6 is actually showing double attack on f7 and c8, so this is quite crushing. So g takes, we just take this, and white is after queen e6 going to be at an exchange up at minimum. It doesn't even have to do that. It could even bring the rook in for the attack, so it's a huge advantage there for white. So knight takes f6 is not really any good either. So we see in the game bishop takes f6, now rook takes d5, which is the strongest move in the position, this double attack on queen and loose rook on c8, queen c6, and now here rook d7 is simple and strong, just exploiting that pin. It's going to be material up, but even stronger, rook d6 was played, trying to deflect the queen away from c8 first. The queen dropped back actually to e8, and now the final move of the game, rook d7, is played, and black is defenseless against trying to defend f7 here. If bishop takes d4 check, well, can just take with the rook on d7. Careful not to take with this rook, I think some caution needed here because queen e1, but just take with the rook on d7. So there's nothing there for black. So this game kind of showed how a dynamic approach to the isolated queen's pawn was used by Mikhail Botvinnik. If we go back, it looks as though black's play seemed quite convincing, because he was also getting rid of his problem piece by putting it on c6. But from a king safety perspective, it kind of overrode these considerations, with white's bishop being kept on the board unparried by a counterpart. White's actual king attack was very, very strong here, and as we saw, even g6 would have failed here tactically because of the dynamic stuff with f5 in particular, which was mating black in the variations we saw. So a very, very tricky position for black indeed at this stage, even though black seems to have a very comfortable, I say, queen's pawn. And it's this approach to chess, this very concrete analytical approach, which Mikhail Botvinnik extended the kind of work of his predecessor Alexander Alekhine. But Botvinnik also brought to the game this idea of preparing concretely for the tournament conditions to give maximum performance at a particular tournament. For example, at Hastings, when he first played at the Hastings Congress before World War II, he didn't do that well, and the next time he played, he arrived 10 days earlier to acclimatise himself to the conditions, the climate and everything else, and he ended up first. So he also trained with people blowing smoke at his face to simulate smoking conditions. So he extended the work of Botvinnik, but he also covered this huge new practical angle of chess to maximise the performance one gives in a particular tournament or against a particular opponent. Okay, I hope you enjoyed that. Comments or questions on YouTube. Thanks very much.